Hello and bonjour, I'm Sarah Bokhari and you are watching Power Dilemmas here at TAGTV. Folks, today we are going to talk about US elections, which is only 21 days away from us. We have either Hillary Clinton winning as a president or we have Donald Trump from the Republican side winning. But there are a lot of things coming up from Donald Trump, his inappropriate behavior, his allegations that the elections will be rigged in November. To talk about this and a lot more, we have today in our studios political analyst and a long-time observer of U.S. politics, John Spink. Welcome to my show.
Thank you, Sarah. It's good to be back.
Very well. Okay, so let's start by focusing on talking about Donald Trump, whether he is really liked by the U.S. population, whether he's representing the U.S. population or not, and what kind of appeal he has.
Okay. Well, I mean, Trump very definitely has an appeal, and when you look back a year and a half ago when he said he was going to run for the Republican nomination, no one took him seriously, including all of the other Republican candidates and most of the media. So I think it came as quite a shock when he ended up winning the nomination and he's where he is today. So he does have an appeal. I think that, though, that appeal, it's limited. Most Republican candidates, when you go back over the last 50, 60, even 70 years, they normally have a base of support in the range of 45%. Because when you get a split of 5 or 6% in a presidential election, that's quite often a landslide. And when you do have elections that are very close, you have squeakers like you had with George W. Bush beating Al Gore, even though Al Gore got a higher percentage of the popular vote. But in this case, Trump has tapped into something. There's no question that there is an anger and a frustration among a certain significant segment of the U.S. population. And they're looking for someone who is going to say what they want to hear, and Trump has filled that. I look back in this country, back in the late 80s, early 90s, the Reform Party was created by Preston Manning by tapping into the very, very similar type of negativity and anger that was directed towards the federal government. And in the case of Preston Manning, I mean, he said a lot of things to do with policy and so on, but what resonated with a lot of blue-collar Canadians in particular was that he felt that Quebec was being given special status. It was receiving an inordinate amount of federal funding. It seemed that the federal government was bending over backwards to give Quebec what it wanted. And you can debate whether that was true or not, but a lot of people bought into that. So there was a lot of anti-Quebec sentiment during that period, during the initial rise of the Reform Party. And Trump has tapped into this. There's no question that a lot of Americans have been hurt since the recession really hit in 2008, 2009. You know, a lot of people have lost jobs and so on. You can't sort of lay that all on government policies, that it was all because of George Bush, where it all started under him, or even Obama. The economy is always evolving, and jobs will be lost, and it's not always, as I said, because of trade agreements and so on. A lot of it is to do with technology. My father was a printer. The official name was typographer. And in the old days, he worked for a newspaper in Toronto, and he would set the galleys of type, and it was all done by hand. And that's what actually went through the presses and produced a newspaper. The typographical union that he belonged to was one of the strongest unions in North America. Today, there are no printers. It's all digital. People sit down at a Mac and they basically enter in what needs to be done, and the newspaper is produced. There's no human intervention like it was back then. So there was a major job that just basically disappeared. If you look at Fortune 500 companies from even say 1960, I think you'll find that the majority of them are no longer in business. It's because technology changes, a lot of things evolve. Now, it's fine because Canada, as well as the U.S., has lost a lot of manufacturing jobs. And Trump can argue that they've gone to Mexico or China. And that's true, because certainly labor is cheaper there. And if you're running a business, you're trying to make a profit and you're looking at keeping your operating costs down. But what has come in is high-tech jobs in the IT field and so on that didn't exist 25 years ago. The problem is that people that held blue-collar jobs working in a manufacturing plant, and that plant closes, the jobs disappear, they don't necessarily have the skills or the education to take those new jobs that have been created. So there's always going to be people that are caught in that. And I think that Trump has tapped into that very, very well, that there are people that are angry and they're looking at who they can blame for it. And I think where Trump has been very effective in this, he's blamed, whether it's Hispanics, Mexicans, Muslims, immigrants in general, that all of these people have contributed to your problems. Mm-hmm. It's not your fault. And I really hate to use this example because, it's almost become overblown, but in the late 20s and early 1930s, that's exactly what Adolf Hitler did in Germany. Germany was going through terrible inflation, high unemployment. They were given a very punitive peace agreement after World War I. So if the whole country is basically in a mental depression about, we're so bad off and life is terrible, and along comes somebody who says, yeah, but it's not your fault. You were betrayed, in this case, by the Jews. Pure fabrication, but that resonated with a lot of Germans. They had somebody that they could blame. Now, I'm not trying to compare what Trump is doing to that, but the idea of creating a scapegoat, history is full of examples like that. And in this case, Trump has blamed Muslims, Hispanics, immigrants in general, that they're the ones that have resulted in the breakdown of law and order. They're the ones that are taking your jobs. They're getting government assistance. And there's a very little legitimacy to that argument, but it does resonate with a lot of people, and they love it when he does stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Let's divert the attention more to his inappropriate behavior. How would you consider that? Shall we consider a politician and shall we create screen between a politician and his private life, or a politician should be judged on his private life?
Well, I think today with social media and electronic media like television, internet, and so on, you have to take that into account. In days gone by, that was never an issue because nobody knew about it. I mean, FDR is well documented that FDR had an affair throughout his presidency and even before. John Kennedy, they joke about it now that whether it's Marilyn Monroe or other young movie stars or whatever, it was just a revolving door at the White House. The Secret Service knew about it. The media had their ideas about it, but it was off limits. But now, if the media don't report on something, somebody on the street with their cell phone is going to take a picture or a video and post it on Facebook, so everybody knows anyway. So I think nowadays it is fair game. So I think that politicians have got to be held to a higher standard if they want that trust. When Bill Clinton ran against George Bush Sr., during the part of the campaign, Clinton had admitted that when he was in university, he had smoked marijuana. And Bush made a big deal about that and said, this election is all about character, and you can't elect somebody like that. Now, as it turned out, there were other character flaws of Clinton's that nobody knew about at that time that subsequently came out, and look what happened. He was impeached. And they're still talking about that today. So the fact that Trump has done the things that he's done, and that there's video proof of it, and the interviews that he did on Howard Stern, I mean, some of the things that he said, we can't even discuss those because they're so disgraceful. So I don't think you can just say, well, oh no, he'd be a good president despite all of that. How he's been, referred to women and how he's treated women, and his feelings about minorities and all the rest of it. That's part of it now. It has to be.
So what are people taking away from his behavior, and why is he still liked?
He's liked by his base, which when I said earlier that normally Republicans never go below 45%. Well, he is below that because in most national polling right now, he's running between 35 and 40. So he has lost a lot of independents and traditional Republicans who I don't think are necessarily going to vote for Hillary. I think they're just going to sit home. They're not going to vote. But the people that we talked about earlier that really love that hard line, let's not be politically correct attitude of his, they love that. That's just music to their ears. And he himself said he could go out on Fifth Avenue in New York and shoot somebody and he probably wouldn't lose any votes. I think he's probably right. I think the people that are so passionately supporting him, it wouldn't matter what came out, they're still going to support him. But there's a limit to that. And I think it's sort of in the 35 to 40%, no more than that. And that's why I don't think it's possible for him to win the election.
Okay, so now let's connect both the candidates. In the polls, both of them are not liked as such.
Right.
So isn't this election kind of depriving people of their choice?
Well,
do people have a choice, in other words?
You can argue that both ways. I've certainly said or heard people say that because both candidates have such a high unlikability factor, that they really don't have a choice, and it comes down to voting for the lesser of two evils. But I think it's more than that. Donald Trump, despite a lot of the crazy ideas that he's come up with, he has stuck pretty closely to traditional social conservative Republican goals in the last few years in terms of somehow repealing Roe versus Wade, which gave a woman the right to choose, marriage equality, the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms. And I think what this election is all about, even though people aren't talking about it, it's about the Supreme Court. Because people have a very definite choice. Are you going to vote for someone like Hillary Clinton, who will appoint justices, who will uphold a woman's right to choose, will uphold marriage equality, and will want to do something about curbing gun violence in the U.S. through greater controls? Whereas Donald Trump will, he'll take the opposite position. There's one vacancy on the Supreme Court right now that the Republican Congress wouldn't allow Obama to fill. But this president, over the next 4 years, will probably fill anywhere from 2 to 4 vacancies on the Supreme Court. The whole future of the Supreme Court and Supreme Court decisions on some of those major social issues are all riding on this election. So when people say, why would you support Hillary Clinton? For me, it's about one thing and one thing only. I do not want Donald Trump appointing the next few justices to the Supreme Court.
Okay, so John, you just mentioned that you will, if you were a U.S. citizen, you would vote for Hillary Clinton because there is no other choice. And the other word is for Trump, right? Why are people liking Hillary Clinton? Why is she liked?
Well, I think that's the problem. I don't think she has a high likability. A lot of people don't like her. I don't think Hillary comes across as the most warm and approachable individual. I think when she was First Lady, I think she did a lot of good as First Lady, and she laid the groundwork for some sort of a national health care program. But she made a lot of enemies, and she did when she was in the Senate as well. She made a lot of enemies on both sides of the House. And so I think that this trustworthy business has come up. It certainly hasn't helped her with the business with the private email server, and supposedly 33,000 emails were deleted. I mean, and Trump mentions that at every opportunity. And, in fact, the mantra at his rallies is lock her up, which is absolutely outrageous. But because of all these things, some of it has to stick. So even though I think she has done a lot of good work when she was First Lady, when she was Senator from New York, and I believe she did when she was Secretary of State, there's so much stuff has been thrown at her. A lot of it is going to stick, and some people are going to believe that. So to say, you know, why is she so well liked? I don't think she is. I think she has her supporters, the same as Donald Trump does. People that do believe in her, and they like her record, and they would vote for her because of what she's achieved over the years. But for those that don't really care for her, don't necessarily trust her, I think it comes down to which is the lesser of two evils. And I think, I truly believe that when they get into the voting booth, they're going to conclude that Hillary Clinton is a much safer bet than what Donald Trump would be.
Has she been successful in politicizing Trump's inappropriate behavior?
Well, I think that her campaign is actually playing this very, they're very clever about this. Of course, she's vulnerable because Trump keeps bringing up about the accusations levied against Bill Clinton, which I think that's a little bit unfair. Bill Clinton is not on the ballot. When she was First Lady, I think maybe she was a little bit too aggressive in standing up for her husband. A lot of people would say maybe that was laudable, to forgive her husband for his transgressions and support him. You know, maybe she went too far. I don't know. But she's not mentioning a lot of this stuff. She, at the beginning of the last debate, she did just talk about it briefly in her opening statement about, you know, this tape and that's the real Donald Trump and so on. But she's sort of backing off on that because Trump doesn't know how to let things go. If he feels he's been slighted or attacked, he has to, you know, fight back, and that's what he's doing, because these stories probably could have died a week ago. But every day, Trump spends half his time at his speeches attacking the women that have come forward and who have accused him of sexual improprieties. And all he does is gives the story more legs. So Hillary's being pretty careful here. She's sort of staying back and letting him hang himself.
She's keeping her grace.
Yeah, well, in fact, well, I don't know whether it's grace. I think that Hillary is a pretty shrewd politician. I don't know whether you saw, there was an episode of Saturday Night Live a couple of weeks ago after the first debate. And Alec Baldwin was portraying Donald Trump, and of course, very over-the-top impersonation. But he was on one of his rants and so on. And then the moderator said to the actress playing Hillary Clinton, "Well, it's time for your 2 minutes." And she said, "No, it's okay. He can have mine, and just let him keep talking because he's digging himself in deeper." And I think that you're seeing that right now with the Clinton campaign. Supposedly, she's been off for the part of the week preparing for the next debate, but they're just letting him go at it because every time he opens his mouth, he makes it worse by attacking these women and saying they're liars and they're being paid and so on and so forth. And so I think that she's not going overboard on attacking him on this because he's doing it himself. I thought it was very interesting on Jake Tapper's program on CNN on the weekend. They had a Trump supporter on there, a congresswoman, and she was trying to dismiss all these accusations. And she said, well, it's really, he said, she said. And Jake Tapper said, well, actually, to be accurate, it's he said, she 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 said. It's not just one person that's coming out. It's a lot, well, 9 or 10, I think, as of today. And most of these people did mention it to other people when the incidents occurred. So it's not like they've suddenly dreamed this up today in order to attack him. I think that he created this when he was asked at the last debate, was this all talk on that Access Hollywood tape, or have you ever done those things? And he said, no, I've never done those things. And these women are saying, whoa, wait a minute, yeah, you did. But he just keeps dragging it on. Even his own campaign manager has been trying to get him to stay on issues that have resonated with his base, whether it's security, whether it's the wall with Mexico or whatever, and he's not doing that. I listened to one of his speeches yesterday, and he spoke for 20 minutes, and in the first 5 minutes, he crammed in everything to do with economics and unemployment and job creation and security and everything else. And then for the next 15 minutes, he talked about the women that had accused him of these things and why they were liars. So the focus naturally on the media is going to be on that because that's what he's spending all his time on. So I think Hillary has been very effective in exploiting that by basically not exploiting it, letting him do it himself.
Let him shoot in his own feet.
Well, I think that's what we're seeing happening because he just cannot take an attack and turn the other cheek. He can't do it. He can't do it.
So hypothetically, just consider if Donald Trump becomes the president of the United States of America, what kind of United States of America we will be looking at?
Well, I think that the divisions that you've seen being created in this election would certainly be perpetuated and probably worsened. I mean, when you figure that over 90% of African Americans are voting, according to the latest pollings, would vote for Hillary over Trump. It's about 70% of Hispanics would vote for Hillary over Trump. I think that Hillary is leading with educated women, both white women and women of color, by about 25, 30 percentage points.
So connected to this, a huge Muslim community lives in the United States of America.
Absolutely.
So if they see, if the day sees Trump being the president of the United States of America, what is going to happen to the Muslim community?
Well,
I have to ask you this question because this forum is kind of secular, but more Muslim viewers.
And it's a great question because when you look at what he has said in this campaign, if he were to become president and actually do it, first of all, he's talking about banning any immigration of Muslims. He's also talking about Muslims should wear some sort of visible identification to say that they're a Muslim. I mean, this sounds like,
scary.
Hitler with his putting, yellow Star of David on people. I mean, I think it's outrageous that you would actually ask people of a particular significant faith within the United States to wear something to designate them so they stand out, that they're different from other people. They want undercover law enforcement people, infiltrating mosques in various Muslim communities within the country. I mean, this is outrageous. I mean, this is he's so quick to defend the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, but the First Amendment is freedom of religion. And, he's looking the other way on that because this is a direct threat against a major religion in the United States, and it's just not acceptable.
Yeah, because major population, the Muslim population, they have very strong, they have very strong positions in the community. They're doctors and most of them the army as well.
Absolutely. Look how he treated that couple that their son had been killed in Iraq. The Gold Star family. When they spoke at the Democratic convention, Trump basically, mocked them and mocked her because she didn't say anything because she probably wasn't allowed to say anything. I mean,
however, she lost her son and she's sad.
Exactly. I mean, this soldier was a decorated veteran who died on behalf of the United States, and for Trump to belittle them because they were Muslim, I mean, that's just not acceptable. And I just fear that if he were somehow to win, it gives license to that type of attitude and mentality. So I think that there's a lot riding on this. For me, a lot of it is the Supreme Court, but it's much more than that. It's much more than that.
Is he still confident that he's going to win the election?
No,
or
I don't think
things
he is.
like this, that elections are going to be rigged? He has some doubts.
I think he's giving
now
himself.
He's not going to win.
He's giving himself an escape route here. That I think that he is smart enough to know that the chances of him winning are diminishing by the day. But by doing this, he's basically, he won't accept defeat himself. So wasn't my fault that we lost the election. They cheated. The media were in a big, international conspiracy to stop me, or voting fraud. I mean, I heard Rudy Giuliani on TV talking about all the dead people that are going to vote Democrat in Philadelphia and New York. I mean, that's absurd. I mean, there's been independent studies done by universities and law firms going back 50 years looking at actual incidents of voter fraud in the United States. And it is so minuscule that it's barely worth mentioning. Is it going to happen? Sure, there's always going to be that happens here, but no, he's trying to set it up so that if he loses, they stole it from me, and that I think is the most dangerous thing that he's saying, because I think that you've got enough people out there that have this blind loyalty to him, and they're caught up in all of the emotion and the fervor. I can see if Hillary wins the election, I can see you're going to have violence in the street. Mike Pence gave a rally last week, and a woman in the audience got up and said, I'll be honest with you, Mr. Pence, if Hillary wins this election, I believe it's time for a revolution. Mm-hmm. And he was very uncomfortable with that. I think Mike Pence is a totally different animal than Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. He's got a lot more class and everything else. But I think that she is not necessarily alone in that. And I can certainly see a lot of people will, after the election, will say it was stolen from us. And I can see there could be potential for significant violence in the U.S. And I think that's a real worry.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's take our conversation to the impact of the U.S. election on U.S.-Canada relations, how it's going to impact our relation with the United States of America.
Okay. Well, I guess the most obvious thing is that Trump says he's going to tear up the North American Free Trade Agreement.
That exactly, after.
Which has, I know that we've gone through a lot of the same thing as the state. There's been a lot of displacement of jobs because of trade agreements. But for the most part, I think very few economists would say that this has been anything other than extremely positive for Canada since the NAFTA was introduced. So I think we run a real risk if that trade agreement is torn up. I think also the fact that Trump has been very critical of our healthcare system in this country. He basically said it was so terrible that most Canadians go to the U.S. to get medical procedures, which is not true. Yeah, I would say that probably some people, if they do have private, wealth, rather than face a waiting list here, they may very well go down to the States and get treatment. But I think that that's the exception. It certainly isn't the rule. I just cannot, I'm not a big fan of Justin Trudeau, but can you honestly see Justin Trudeau and Donald Trump being golfing buddies? I mean, it's not going to happen. They are just so polar opposite. I don't even think that Stephen Harper would have gotten along with Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. So I think that there's going to be a real chilling of relations between the two countries. And I think that if we lose NAFTA, I think that that's going to have a serious economic impact on us. Mm-hmm. So we're not immune. And plus the fact, if you do have a greater racial divide between race and religion in the U.S., I can't see how that wouldn't spill over here, to at least to some degree. Mm-hmm. Because most, not most, but a lot of families here have relatives that live in the U.S. and vice versa. We travel back and forth. We have friends there. I mean, my own daughter lives in Baltimore, Maryland with her family. And fortunately, she's voting for Hillary, but that's beside the point. Uh-huh. But no, I mean, the border is so, integrated. I think that if you had something of that magnitude happening in the U.S., there would be some sort of a residual spillover into Canada, which I just can't see how that would be anything but bad for us.
Mm-hmm. Okay, on the softer note, if you are given a quiz and you want to describe Donald Trump in 3 words and Hillary Clinton in 3 adjectives, what are you going to use?
Well, I mean, I'm not, hiding my feelings on Donald Trump. I would say number 1 would be that he's a narcissist. I think he sees everything only, in terms of how it affects him, how he looks, how he appears. I truly believe that. I think he's also a borderline sociopath. I think that he can lie, and I think that when he tells the lie so often, he believes it's true. And when he lashes out at people and says, nasty things about Rosie O'Donnell or even about Hillary, and I don't think that it affects him. I don't think the man has a conscience. I really don't. So, I guess those are the first two that come to mind, a narcissist and a sociopath. And I think the other one, I don't think that there's any way you can avoid saying that he is a misogynist. I do not for a minute believe that he sees women as equal. I think he's proven that over and over again. And lately, a woman who had a senior vice president job within the Trump organization, so she was obviously promoted within the Trump organization. She basically said the same thing, that it was very obvious how he viewed women. And, I think that he promoted some because it was great there was one rally early in the game, and most of his rallies are all, white men with some women. And there was an African-American man there. He says, "Hey, there's my African-American."
Yeah.
He has his token women too. And he always points to Ivanka as an example of women that have risen within the organization. This is his daughter, for crying out loud. As far as Hillary is concerned, I think that when Trump was asked at the last debate if he had anything positive to say about her, I think he was quite accurate, that she is extremely hardworking, and I think that is true. They say that when she worked at the State Department, 18, 20-hour days were not unusual for her. So despite Trump saying she's got no stamina, the record doesn't bear that out. I think that she is not a quitter. Even with all the stuff that's been thrown at her, the stuff that's been brought up about some of Bill's indiscretions, about at all of Trump's rallies, lock her up on the national debate. He said, the first thing I'm going to do is appoint a special prosecutor, and you'd be in jail. She doesn't sort of turn around and run from that. She just carries on, and I think that that's a mark of character. I think that if the one negative that I would say about her is that the word it's not arrogant. That's not the right word, but it's sort of that she somehow seems to think that maybe not all the rules apply to her, and certainly that has been levied by Trump, and I think there's some degree of truth to that. But I think her work ethic and her determination, I think they outweigh some of that. When you read history, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was the ultimate patrician. He came from a wealthy, Hudson Valley family in New York, private schools, and that's the way he viewed the world. And John Kennedy came from a very similar background, but I think that the attributes far outweighed that, and it didn't prevent them from being good presidents. Ronald Reagan is the same thing, Ronald Reagan, his entire life was in Hollywood, and yet, as someone who wouldn't vote Republican today, I think Ronald Reagan was a pretty good president. He was a big tent Republican. He, brought record numbers of blacks and Hispanics into the Republican fold. And it was just his way of governing. He wasn't invictive, he wasn't malicious, he built bridges. And that's what we're not seeing today. Donald Trump does not believe in bridges. Hillary has made attempts, but not as successful as she needs to be. But we've still got 3 weeks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, John, for being at my show. And folks, we just heard a very good analysis, an in-depth analysis by John Spink on the U.S. elections. So we still have 21 days. The next debate is on Wednesday, 19th of October. And I hope you all watch the debate. And your vote is a very sacred right to you. You want to use your vote to elect conscientious people. And till our next show, bye-bye.
#1 multicultural channel. This is TAG TV.